Right now, you are living through the birth and rapid evolution of a new kind of intelligence, AI.
Rival tech luminaries who have already reshaped our world are in an arms race. Recent polls suggest 70 to 90% of all CEOs plan to invest heavily in AI behind them.
The numbers are staggering, amounting to hundreds of billions of dollars in the next few years. Governments and regulators are stepping in as well, setting the stage for a global paradigm shift.
But have you stopped to understand what AI really is? Are you prepared for a world where AI will impact your job, your health, your relationships, and maybe even the nature of your humanity?
I'm Charlie Stack.
I am Lax Srinivasan. We believe your success, our success, depends on us starting to have a different set of conversations about AI.
Join us as we get to know our new neighbor. Welcome to the machine. A year ago, AI meant something different. It was more nebulous. Maybe robots, maybe voice assistants, maybe recommendation engines, maybe your favorite sci-fi movie. Over the course of the last year, though, all of that has changed with the public introduction of large language models and generative AI. Suddenly, AI has faces that feel very human. ChatGPT, Google Bard, Midjourney. This is AI that anyone with a decent internet connection can start using today. While our view is that AI is really a much broader universe, it is also crystal clear that generative AI and large language models are going to get a lot of attention for the foreseeable future. So in today's episode, let's take a closer look at these technologies and how they will start to show up in our everyday lives, at work, at home, in our social circles, and in our consumer goods. We are honored to be joined by Kelly Schaefer, who currently leads product management for large language model applications at Google Labs. In a nutshell, what does that mean? Kelly is responsible for driving how Google's GenAI capabilities show up in its broader services and in entirely new products, bridging the technology being developed in Google's R&D into the tech that people use every day, whether you're a coding, looking to automate coding work, or just one of the 1.8 billion people who use Gmail. I love Kelly's perspective on Gen AI because she also grew up in the world of design thinking at IDEO and has applied that design perspective to a number of different technology frontiers, from payments to e-commerce, in addition to AI. Kelly, welcome to the machine.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be talking with you. Thanks for having me.
Kelly, your job must be one of the most boring jobs on the planet.
So boring.
Yeah, welcome. Great to have you.
It's also, I'll say it's gotten a lot more exciting in the past year or so, as Charlie alluded to. I sometimes joke with my friends that when I joined Google to work on this, interesting projects that people wanted to hear about. But our star has risen in terms of being the cool kids on the block, knowing a lot about the AI world. So it's been really fun.
And I joke that Google doesn't have a chief AI officer. I think last time I checked, everybody does AI. So I thought entire Google is all labs. So what is Google Labs?
Good question. So Google Labs is basically a group within Google that thinks about a lot of these AI applications and how to apply it both to our existing products and then also to think about the next generation of Google AI-enabled products, knowing that, hey, within the mobile generation, like think about all the new apps and experiences and products that came out of that technology shift. And so a lot of what we spend our time on is, hey, what are the AI-enabled products that we couldn't have imagined even 2 years ago that Google should be working on? And then also, how do we support all of Google as we evolve our existing products? Although, as you joked, and is true, everyone at Google at this point works on AI. So there are a lot of folks thinking about how do we integrate AI really deeply into our core products.
Excellent. I know who to call when I'm not getting exactly what I want on Gmail.
I get a lot of those calls, even when I can't help.
Well, we'll try not to use you for tech support. And I think there's lots there that we want to get into. I mean, for starters, Kelly, one of the things we've talked about is this overarching view that you have of Gen AI as less of this, scary replacement for people, but more as a productivity partner to people. And I think a lot of the work that you're doing is really in support of that. Tell us a little bit about that view. How do you think about AI starting to get incorporated into our everyday lives?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. And while I'd say, I like your fun AI science fiction movie, as much as the next girl, when I think about how AI will help us at work, I'm just excited. I'm not too scared about things. And the way that I think about it, and the way we talk about it a lot in labs, is about how do we help augment humans as opposed to replacing humans. So what can we do to make people more productive? And I tend to think about this in two categories. So one, and I think folks will relate to this. One is, what's some of the repetitive work that you're doing that you just love someone else to help with? If you think about this on the home front, I still remember my grandma having a dryer in her basement for clothes that had a crank on it, and you would dry it yourself. And no one's upset when that's automated by a drying machine. And I think about this in the workplace too, of what are some of those tasks that you're doing where you really feel like, I'm not even using my brain for this. How can we think about how to make it easier? Just as an example, when we have job postings, we get tons of emails from candidates. And I usually reply with just about the same thing. Like, why doesn't why don't our email systems know that that's what I'm likely to say and draft it for me? Why doesn't everything integrate seamlessly? And of course, we're working on a lot of these things. So one category is like, hey, what's the repetitive stuff that we would love help with, and how can we actually train our own AI to help with those things? And then the other category that I'm really excited about is this idea of where you get stuck in your work and need a nudge. So for a software engineer, that might be, as they encounter a bug and they're thinking, I don't know where to start addressing this. AI can really help with something like that. For someone who's working on a document, it might be, hey, I'm brainstorming new ideas. I want some questions to ponder. And I tend to think about AI in the moments where you're kind of tempted to switch to another work task because whatever you're working on, you want to break because you're actually not sure what you should write next in the document. And really like the idea of AI kind of stepping in to help in that way. And then as I think longer term about how AI could help you at work, I'm personally really excited about this idea of, AI as a set of agents that can help you with different things. So you've got your coding agents, you've got your brainstorming agents, you've got your writing partner. And, we have glimmers of that already, but I think that's going to make a lot of progress over the next couple of years.
That's fascinating. I'm a big fan of jobs to be done. I think, we hire a product or a service to get a job done. And so it's kind of, I think you've just described two jobs, that one that I want to not do because it's repetitive. And then the other one is more of like things that where I get stuck. Right? Those looks like are two big areas. Now, is that the lens through which you go through the universe of Google and the end users and say, like, how do you do that? There's so much. Like, I live in Google universe, where you wake up and go to sleep. So how do you, where do you think where the low-hanging fruits are? Like, how do we go about it as an end user?
There's a few things. So one is built into our core products like Gmail and Google Docs, for example. One of my teams built the early version of what we call Help Me Write, which is basically, hey, as you're getting started, how do you get kind of an outline or a structure in place? So there are things like that. Right now, I'd say as an end consumer, not everything is built in, right? Like AI magic has not fully come to pass yet. I think it will. But there's a lot you can do too with using, products like Gemini or AI Studio. Happy to talk more about those, where you can basically interact with the AI to get information. And so let me make that a little bit more concrete. I was joking earlier that I've got a family member who started writing articles for their local newspaper. And one of the things that this family member of mine gets stuck on is figuring out what's a captivating headline. And it's just not her thing to, come up with captivating headlines. She's not, a dyed-in-the-wool reporter or something. And what you can do with these models is do things like send them your article and say, hey, come up with 10 headlines. And then you can reply, hey, I like number 8. It's a little too cheesy. Can you make me 5 variants of that one? And so I think people starting to experiment a lot more in the workplace can be really helpful, and also uncover some of the things that companies can eventually do in a systematic way to help their workers. A lot of those will be discovered because, one enterprising individual tried to figure out, is there a way I could write this marketing material in half the time? And then started playing around with some of the tools.
Excellent. And Charlie, feel free to jump in, but just pushing on that thread, you said something about, think of kind of the LLMs as, working with humans, which I fundamentally subscribe to. Do you think that's the more responsible use of LLMs, or is it kind of some fundamental limitations of LLMs, or, generally AI as they go? What is kind of like the why behind that thesis? Why should it be this, and why shouldn't a CEO or a executive think about, well, if I want to do productivity improvement, why can't it replace whole jobs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of my answer is grounded in where the technology is. And I see a lot of value for this orchestration that humans, I think, are uniquely suited to do. Meaning, I would love to be able to say, hey, writing agent, please, take these materials, and we have some tools like this. Take these materials I've already drafted and help make it better, or make sure you check my citations or something like that. While at the same time, maybe, you're also in your IDE coding up something, and you have a helper there. I think, maybe I'm an idealist, but I think of it as, what are the things that humans can uniquely do? And then how do we elevate those? I do think over time, there are certain things that anyone in their job would want to be automated. We talk about things like, hey, for, let's say I'm an entrepreneur, and let's say I sell things on Etsy, just making up an example. I probably get a lot of questions asking, oh, do you ship internationally? Turns out I have that information on my Etsy page. That is an answerable question. But of course, you're going to get questions like that from potential customers, and of course, you want to answer them. But as an Etsy shop owner, would I be totally comfortable with that being responded to automatically? Of course, helps me in my business. And yeah, I don't think there needs to be a person who responds to things that are very obvious. Now, let's say you get a more complex question. I love the idea that a response is drafted for you, and then you can add on your own, special thoughts when they ask you, hey, can you customize this piece to be, well suited for my kid, or whatever the thing is. And so I do think there's something about this human as orchestrator and kind of confirming and weaving together the parts that I think, at least in the short term, is going to be a really interesting niche for us to play in, and also for us to develop skills in. It's been very interesting, both on my team and also just with, folks I talk with generally, to see how people are bringing AI into their own work and personal lives, and how someone who's starting to get familiar with these tools can be far more productive, and also understand, instinctually when it's going to be helpful and actually when it's not going to be helpful. That's been really interesting for me.
Kelly, this is, really fascinating to hear you think about the sort of, mental model around how we partner with machines. And I love this vision of, I sort of see us all as like orchestra conductors. I think that's a really clear picture for anybody who's ever gone to the symphony, to kind of hold in their head. It implies a different sort of level of of knowledge and understanding necessary, especially for people in, managerial or leadership roles where, a great conductor sort of has to understand enough about the violins and the cellos and the drums in order to effectively do their job. They don't need to be a virtuoso player themselves, right? And so you can imagine sort of this, this shift of people moving from, needing to be like the world's best violinist to, potentially understanding, how to think about where a violin fits into an orchestra. How much thought are you seeing around this topic of the sort of the human role in this, right? It's like, on the one hand, it's Google's job to bring tools into existence that people can use, right? I mean, you're a software company fundamentally. But I kind of imagine like part of what you're doing in labs is sort of thinking about, the human on the other side of that software. And I'd love to learn more about, about how you think about, the sort of people's roles in the world changing alongside of the technology.
Yeah, great question. So I think about this a lot, and in some ways I think about it in the reverse of the way that many people do. So a lot of people think about, hey, there's an engineer and their job is going to change because a software engineer, their job's going to change because now they're going to be able to code faster and, kind of code gets completed as you write it. And there's all these great opportunities. And that's totally true and really supportive of that. But the reason I say I sometimes think about it in the reverse is that I think about folks like my husband. So my husband is not a software engineer, but he has his own company, and he's technically smart, but not technically trained, if that makes sense. And so what he now does using these models is actually generate code himself. Is he fluent in writing code? No, definitely not. But now he has this tool that actually expands his skill set and lets him start to tinker with things in a way that would be, frankly, like completely inaccessible for him even a couple of years ago, unless he was willing, to spend the time to really learn it. And so that's been very interesting to me of, if we think about a lot of our productivity tools in the past 10 years, they've allowed kind of anyone to be a marketer or build a website. And I see that really expanding of, hey, now not only do you have a tool like, say, Squarespace, where you can make your own website, but actually you have image generation tools where you can create assets for your company or, generate 100 branding options. And if you think about a small business owner, like that would be totally inaccessible even a few years ago, beyond just the most basic kind of, mix and match types of tools. So that I'm really excited about. The other thing I think about on the human side is I think a lot of our jobs involve a lot of orchestration already. We just don't think of it that way. So if I think about, if I think about this podcast, even for example, let's say you all are going to interview an AI ethicist on your podcast. And this AI ethicist has...
Good guess, by the way. Good guess.
I'm having lunch next week with an AI ethicist that I'm very excited about. So I was thinking of it. So let's say they've written 147 papers on AI ethics, and you all are very diligent hosts, but maybe you've read 4 of them, not 147 of them. You can now do things, and this is one of the tools that I work on at Google called Notebook LM. You can do things like upload, a dozen papers and actually Q&A with those papers. And so if you think about the way that you orchestrate setting up a podcast episode of, I need to read about the person, I need to see some of their work, I need to develop questions, you're already orchestrating this podcast episode. And how could that be different if you had tools where you could upload all of the papers? You could say, hey, based on these papers, pull out themes from this person's work. Based on those themes, like suggest some interview questions. Say, hey, I've been meaning to ask about this controversy this AI ethicist was involved in. Help me figure out how to phrase that question in the best possible way. And so that's where you start to see both, I think folks are already orchestrators in many ways, but also they can have this thought partner that's this kind of objective but creative force that can help them with preparing some of this. I think there's another issue that a lot of these AI tools can seem a little intimidating at first to people, but the barriers are really lowering over time, which is exciting.
Yeah, you sort of that's why educators are so freaked out about AI. I mean that that last bit on sort of the changing dynamic of knowledge acquisition is really revolutionary.
Yeah. It is. I think about this a lot for myself too, because I have 2 little kids, and I think about, hey, what will their essay writing be like, or their exams be like in an age of AI? I also, though, think about what are all the things that they'll have access to that I didn't, or you all didn't growing up. Like, I still remember my parents were the encyclopedia folks, like who had the whole set of encyclopedias, on the credenza or whatever. And we would go and look up, oh, you have a question about something, look it up in encyclopedia. Not to mention the encyclopedia was about 15 years old, and there were some questionable things in that encyclopedia. But I think about, some of the things that will be really interesting in education. An example here that Labs came out with recently is this thing called SchiffBot. So it's based on a guy named Dan Schiffman, who's an NYU professor. And he also has a wildly popular YouTube channel. I think it's called The Coding Train. We basically turned him into an educational bot that does back and forth training with you on how to code, and was purposefully trained to not just tell you the answer immediately, but actually challenge you in a more Socratic method. And I think about that for my kids of, they asked me last night, where do asteroids come from? Or like, how are asteroids made? I'm like, well, I kind of know the answer to that, but I would sure be happy to say, okay, let's sit down with so-and-so, the professor of astrophysics, and have a 3-way conversation about that. And so I do think AI presents a lot of challenges on the education and learning side. There's no doubt, but also a lot of interesting opportunities to say, hey, we can actually get people's knowledge way deeper, way faster versus, some of the old school ways that I grew up with.
Yeah, Kelly, I think we got 2 ends of the spectrum, right? On one hand, the education aspect. So how do we use this tool? But on the other end, the orchestra conductor, the virtuoso analogy that Charlie and you were using, it almost looks like where things are at today. It makes a person that's already somewhat of an expert in the field. I mean, it looks like the productivity gain is kind of directly proportional to the expertise you have, either because you know what to ask. Charlie and I try to come up with a logo for our podcast, and we both tried. I think Charlie is much better at knowing what to ask. I mean, I just tried for like a few minutes and I just gave up because I don't even know. If you show me the output, I'll tell you if it looks bad or good, which I did to Charlie, a few of them. But so how do we do this? I mean, I can see this thing behind Gmail and helping me to complete sentence. I get that, right? That you don't need to be anything. That's like the day-to-day. But where's the unlock going to be? If it's only help the experts are not going to need the non-experts. So what's going to happen to them? What do you think about all that? I mean, you're sitting in Google that can influence millions, hundreds of millions of users. So how do you think about that piece of it?
Yeah, let me back up to maybe a year and a half ago or so for myself, when there was an area I was definitely not an expert in, and some of the things I saw that I think lead to what's coming next. So a while back, when some of these image models were just coming out, I have computer vision experience, which sounds related, but it's actually not. Like, I didn't know how to use this kind of image model that could generate anything. And the funny thing is that I would see on these websites all these beautiful images that were generated. Then I go in and I try to make my own image, and you're kind of met with the blank page problem, where you're like, well, yeah, I actually know what I want to make. And even if I can picture it in my mind, I don't know how to describe that. I was not an art history major. I don't know what avant-garde style versus neo whatever is. And so how am I even going to begin? And at the time, what was very popular in kind of the AI community for all of us nerds were these PDF playbooks that were circulating that would be like 150 pages. And it would basically just be training us on how do you prompt this model. So you would see an image of some like dystopian thing, and it would say, the prompt for this was steampunk dystopian future with like a cityscape at night or something like that. And that is not something I would have come up with on my own. But then you go and at first you're frankly just copying it. Like, okay, what happens if I put some variant of that into the model? And then you start to get this fluency. And I think, so far there has been a requirement for either existing fluency, which frankly, like, no one really had because these things are new, or the extra effort and frankly, community around you to be able to know, I should look at this 150 page PDF. That's totally unrealistic when we think about how is your everyday person going to be using these tools. Like, I don't think most people really want to flip through 150 pages of anything before they use the tool. And so a lot of what we're talking about at Google is thinking about the different personas that will use this technology. So obviously on one end of the spectrum, there are developers who are crazy about this, or at minimum, crazy about the coding aspect and how to become more efficient. And there's a lot of tools that are, building quickly for that. In the middle, I think about a group, people call these folks a variety of things, but a lot of people call them makers of, tinkerers, people who like to play with new things, but maybe don't necessarily have the deep expertise. And we have a product called AI Studio that is appealing to this group and also to developers, that basically makes it really easy to connect some of these different tools together. And I think we're going to make, more progress over time, that easier and easier. But that's what lets people, say, hey, last night, I'm sure you have friends like this, or you do this yourself. Last night, I kind of hacked this together and it doesn't totally work, but it does a little bit. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, which is really smart folks, but who don't particularly want to hack together anything using AI. And there, we're starting to talk more about what are the scalable ways to make AI really accessible. So as an example, from like Notebook LM, which is this way to interact with sources that you have if you're making a podcast, for example. One of the things we heard there was, hey, users were putting documents into Notebook that were onboarding documents for their company. So, Charlie just joined my team and we've got 1,000 resources that he can use, but they're so hard to navigate and I don't have time to tell Charlie about all these. We want to be able to upload them without Charlie being involved, because how would he know what these sources even are? And then give Charlie an easy way to interact with them without having to know where they came from, how this is using AI to ground itself in sources. Like, it doesn't have to know any of that. And so we're starting to think both in our existing and new products, how do we think about the one-to-many experience? Let's figure out how the person who is willing to tinker with this stuff can create an experience that many other people at their company or, just consumers can use. And so I think we'll see more and more of that over time. Did that answer your question?
It does. I mean, is the Notebook LLM, do I need to tune that on my kind of set of PDFs so it gets smarter, or is that so what is about the foundational model, I guess, for your Notebook LLM, without giving away any secret, just conceptually?
Yeah. So basically the way it works is you just go to notebooklm.google.com and you upload your sources. So it could be a PDF, it could be a Google Doc, could be a website. And you as the user have to know, what material you want to talk with. But it uses the same underlying model, any person's experience, but then it grounds it in your material. So we basically you can think of it as like an embeddings model that understands what are the topics that are covered, how are those chunked into different groups. And then when you ask it a question, like let's say you're onboarding to a new company and you say, what's the policy for dealing with customer complaints? Because you're a customer service agent. It basically understands from your existing material, which we don't train on, to be clear, basically, where should I fetch that information from? And should I combine information from multiple sources or multiple parts of a single source into the answer? And then it gives you an answer, and it also gives you citations, which is really important, especially at this stage of AI, to say, hey, here's the information we've gathered, but here's where you can go directly to the source and interact with it and get more information there, and also verify that we've interpreted this correctly. So I like things like that because it lets you interact with proprietary data without that fear, which I think a lot of folks understandably have, of, oh, if I use these tools, is it somehow going to retain my data or train on my proprietary data? And so there's some nice safeguards in place for that as well.
Kelly, I'm interested in your perspective on something because you have this sort of, product. I mean, you're very technical, but you have this unique product view of what's happening in this space. I think one of the things that product people generally are good at is, seeing beyond just what is technically cool to what actually makes sense. And it's a thing that we hear about, all the time. On the one hand, we're in this state right now where anybody for a, pretty measly subscription fee, has these very robust, generative AI tools at their fingertips that can generate images or text or, look through documents to source and fetch information. We're also in the sort of the race to scale right now, right? And so, lots of the investments in that technology are a bet on a future state where, this is getting used viably. And, and ultimately what I hear a lot about in the field of, companies trying to make sense of like, what should I, which use case should I pick? How should I be doing this? Is this sort of notion of how cost effective is this stuff, right? Like just because I can do something in technology for a long time, we've used this analogy of like, do you use the minivan or the Porsche or the private jet to go to the grocery store, right? And and just because you could take a private jet to the grocery store doesn't mean that it makes sense for anybody to do practically. How do organizations, how do individuals in their own lives start to think about investing in the use cases for generative AI, for large language models that will ultimately be practical versus, maybe a little too expensive to make sense?
Yeah. I love this question. And I also want to underscore your point of there's a big difference between getting excited about the technology behind something and what it actually can do for you. I think about this with one of the recent Google Gemini advancements, which folks are very understandably extremely excited about this idea of 1 million context window. So basically what that means is that you can pass 1 million bits of information. Like think of it, it's not exactly this, but think of it as 1 million words of information can be passed to the model. And that is really cool. But when we actually think about use cases, that's cool because it can read a whole book. And so when you think about the product or the end user way to think about this, you don't need to think about it in terms of how big is the context window. You need to think about it of, hey, if you want to be able to understand all the material in a book or many books, that's the right tool for that job. And so I do think about this a lot. I think for companies, it's a tricky time because I know a lot of, leaders are getting a lot of pressure to basically make sure the words artificial intelligence are on every slide of their board deck or whatever. But hey, what are we actually doing that makes sense here? Couple things I'm thinking about. One is that I'm very excited about verticalized use cases within AI. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs who have really deep expertise in a specific vertical, say like legal or healthcare or things like that. And even, deeper than just legal, but like a specific subpart of legal, to think about how are we going to fine tune or do prompting for some of these models to address really specific use cases, because that will make it way more accessible for end users to get value, because it will be basically trained on the specific task that they need to do. And so I would definitely say keeping an eye out for things that, at Google, it would be Google Cloud is doing on the vertical front. And then also for startups that know your industry really well and can tailor some of that, because I don't necessarily think it's realistic for every company to say, hey, I'm going to create this bespoke model just for my company, just for my industry. So that I think we'll see more and more of. I also think there are really good starting points for companies. I mentioned AI Studio earlier, which is basically a tool built by a group in labs that makes it really easy to get started with Gemini. In our case, there are also, of course, tools for competitors that make it easy to get started as well. And that's the kind of thing I would actually encourage leaders in companies to encourage their kind of entrepreneurial hackers to think about, like the people who are experimenting this on the weekend, encourage them to say, hey, we've gathered a list of use cases that fall into maybe that repetitive and annoying use case, or I get stuck in my job use case. And what could you all put together that would be helpful? I think one of the barriers I'm seeing within companies is actually that a lot of employees are a little hesitant to say that they are using AI in their workflows, because it's a little weird to tell your manager, like, hey, that doc you loved? AI helped me write that. What do you think of that? Am I getting good performance review this time around? But I actually think encouraging employees to start experimenting is also a really interesting starting point, and saying like, hey, we want you to be sharing how you use this in your job. Even within Google Labs, we've got a chat group for all the PMs, and we often send out like, hey, I was batting around this proposal, and so I recorded, a voice memo of me talking about it on my drive home. And then I uploaded it to Gemini, and I had it spit out a proposal for me. And like, what do you guys think about this? And obviously we're at one extreme, but there are a lot of things that people can do within their company.
What's around the corner from Google? What's not on the radar yet that we're going to be seeing in the future, and that's going to be, sort of coming to a home user experience near you?
Yep. Good question. And I'll put on a little bit of my confidential hat at the moment to make sure I answer that appropriately. A couple of things that I'm really excited about. One is this million context window. Again, not just for tech's sake, but actually thinking about, hey, when a model can ingest like an hour of video and interact with you about that, what does that enable? So let me mention two technical things, and then what I think some of the implications are. So one is this million context window. Another is that multimodal, which is the idea that models can, both ingest and deliver, audio, video, text, a variety, images. The fact that that's becoming a reality, and actually a high quality reality, because, for a while it was more of a toy, and now it's actually very high quality. That makes me think a lot more about some of these vertical use cases. So I would say definitely be on the lookout for how AI is going to start getting into workflows more deeply. So integrated into your workflow, especially for software engineers, which is already happening. And then also in kind of everyday tools, seeing some nods to how can Google Workspace, which is Google Drive, Google Docs, start to intelligently suggest actions for you that it can take on your behalf. Like that I'm really excited about. And we're already seeing, some of that. And then there's one other area that I'm really excited about that's still very nascent, which I think of as this bidirectional character space. Not a good name. Need to think of a new one for that. But I mentioned earlier, we had this experiment called ShiftBot. So this is the NYU professor's coding educational character. And I think a lot about that because I imagine over time in the workplace and outside of it, you could have a lot of your education and help coming from these really well-educated AI agents or characters that actually are grounded in a lot of context in your world, whether your world is, your favorite videos on YouTube or, the I don't know, investment memo you need to draft. And so really excited to see what happens next there.
Very cool.
Yeah, it looks like we're just in the beginning of the beginning. There's clearly a lot more exciting stuff ahead to make it real and practical.
Yeah, and beginning of the beginning, I think is an important thing for folks to know, that if you're feeling behind in this space, first of all, everyone feels behind all the time because it's changing so quickly. But also that now and 6 months ago, sure, even better, but now is a great time to start to get familiar with these tools. It's in no way too late if you feel totally overwhelmed by where do I even start. Even just, going to AI Studio or Gemini or Notebook LM, like these tools are shockingly accessible for folks. And it's been really fun for me to, I'm in a couple of different types of groups, including one for my business school, and did a presentation for them on like how to start using this in your everyday life. And I think people are left feeling like, oh, I didn't know that was so straightforward. Like I can actually do this myself. And that to me is really fun. Like this has gotten out of the land of that pure research. And I love seeing that things move in that direction.
Well, Kelly, I think, step one today, you've given us a lot of reasons to be excited about the role that all this will be playing, in our everyday lives. I certainly have 3 or 4 things that I'm going to follow up on over the weekend. And Lax, you'll keep working obviously with the image generation tools.
I will. I think I may have to wait for, as Kelly said, a product that just reads my mind and creates the picture. I can say up or down.
I can send you that 150-page PDF for a prompt.
For now, I like playing with it enough that I'm happy to do that work for you, and you can just tell me whether you like it or not.
There you go. That works the best for me so far.
Teamwork is still alive, everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. I think this has been hugely informative. And so thanks again so much for joining us. We'll have to get you back on. There's about 5 other topics that I want to chat about, but
great. I love doing this, and I'm excited to hear about your weekend experiments and other people's as well.
Yeah, great to have you on. Thanks again, Kelly.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right, take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Welcome to the Machine.
To join the conversation, visit us on welcometothemachine-ai.com.
Special thanks to Spencer Stewart, the Return on AI Institute, and our fantastic production team, Trey, Jojo, and John, for helping bring WTTM to life.
Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.
See you next time.